What was the best German unit in World War II is a simple yet very controversial question. But controversial though it may be, certain units will pop up time and time again if you try and pursue an answer, chiefly among which is the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, or LAH for short. As you can imagine, any unit deemed fit by Hitler to both carry his name and be placed right at the front of the order of precedence must have been pretty elite. And indeed, according to Nazi propaganda at least, the LAH certainly was, and many today agree. But is such an assessment correct? Well, today we're going to be answering that question and more as we dive into the history of this legendary unit and explore everything from its cult-like fanaticism to its vast and varied deployment history, and finally, the many, many atrocities that were committed in its time. So, let's begin, shall we? The LAH began not as a frontline unit, but as a personal bodyguard contingent for Adolf Hitler. Established in March 1933, it was initially composed of a select group of men who were chosen not just for their fanatical devotion to Nazism, but also for their personal embodiment of its warped eugenicist principles. Prospective members had to be pure German, tall, muscular, and sport a set of perfectly pearly white gnashers to even be considered. The unit's formation also marked the beginning of a militarized wing within the Nazi Party, as prior to this its instruments of violence, the SA and the earlier incarnations of the SS, had been little but uniformed street thugs, once taught to put on a good militaristic marching show admittedly, but still lacking in any formal military training or underpinnings. The LAH comparison received full military training. In addition to their military training, members of the LAH also underwent rigorous indoctrination to ensure that their pre-existing Nazi principles became deeply entrenched and immovable, with key tenets of this indoctrination being Aryan radicalism, German nationalism, and above all else, blind and loving obedience to the Führer. This ideological schooling was intense, with just as much time being committed to it as was committed to training their physical endurance and combat skills. For their fanatical obedience, members of the LAH were rewarded with a cuff title that they wore on their left arm that simply read Adolf Hitler. Every SS unit had their own unique one of these, but this one, marked only by those two words, was a loud and proud declaration to the world that the man wearing it was one of the Führer's hand-picked favorites. Just before we continue today, a huge shout out to our amazing sponsor, Enlisted. Now let me tell you why Enlisted is the go-to game for all you FPS enthusiasts out there. First, let's talk about the incredible New Era meta update in Enlisted. It introduces research trees for weapons and vehicles, a matchmaker based on the equipment, and various other improvements to gameplay, all developed in collaboration with the Enlisted community. Look, there's never been a better time to explore the new era of Enlisted. Check out some footage that we're playing on screen now. Look, Enlisted is a squad-based FPS set in World War II, where you lead AI-controlled soldiers into massive battles. Fight for the US, Germany, Soviet Union, or Japan, unlocking a vast arsenal of weapons, tanks, and aircraft. But there's even more. Enlisted is pretty hardcore, with intense battles and over 400 authentic weapons and vehicles. You can be an engineer, radio operator, medic, your choice. Plus, the damage model for tanks and aircrafts is incredible. And here's one of the best things, it's approachable for all gamers, whether you're a seasoned pro or a casual player. Play Enlisted for free on PC, PlayStation, or Xbox using my link in the pinned comment below or the video description. New PC players get a special bonus pack for free, including the Enfield P14 rifle, Colt's new service revolver, and more. But that's not all. You also get 4,000 silver and 3 days of premium account time. Act fast, the offer won't last forever. And now back to today's episode. The LAH's training also included a strong emphasis on camaraderie and brotherhood. This is quite normal for all militaries, of course. But with the LAH, there was something more to it, as it verged on being cult-like at times. Members of the LAH were taught that they were an exclusive and close-knit group bound together by their shared beliefs and loyalties to Hitler, and that this fact was the most important thing in their lives. It made them better than everyone else, they were told, and those who would question this bond, be them family members or mere strangers, well, they were the enemy. As a result of all of this, the LAH was not just a prestigious fighting force, it was a propaganda symbol. Wherever Hitler went, the LAH weren't far behind him, a loyal, disciplined, and physically perfect cohort of men that represented everything a good Nazi should aspire to be. Loyal little boys of the Hitler Youth would look up at them with awe, hoping that one day they might be good enough to join their ranks. Their female counterparts in the band of German maidens would scribble nothings in their notebooks about being swept off their feet by a black-clad Prince Charming, and their parents couldn't help but look at the zenith of loyal discipline they represented and feel reassured that all was going to be well under Hitler. All sentiments that were best encapsulated by Corporal Erwin Bartman, who volunteered to join the unit in 1941, who said, "I came to the LAH on the 1st of May. As a Berliner, there was never any doubt in my mind that I would volunteer for this unit. I'd often seen them on parades in the city, on guard at the Reichschancellery and so on. Good uniform, comradeship, and above all else, they were very tall men, at least 1.82 meters tall." As time went on, the LAH would expand in both its role and size, going from a mere squad of 8 well-polished bodyguards to an armored division of between 15 to 20,000 or so, depending on which source you consult. So now, let's see how they got on when the shooting started. The LAH spent its early years goose-stepping outside of all of Berlin's great buildings, and otherwise being glued to Hitler's side. But eventually, in 1938, they would get their first foray as frontline soldiers when they participated in the annexation of Austria. Well, kind of anyway, because not a single shot was fired during the annexation, and the Nazis were met by thunderous applause as they crossed the border. So it's a bit of a stretch to call this frontline action, but still, technically it does count. They then followed this up with a couple of similar jaunts to Czechoslovakia as they participated in both the annexation of the Sudetenland in 1938 and the annexation of the rest of the country the following year. But then, with the invasion of Poland on the 1st of September 1939, they finally got their first taste of actual combat. They also happened to be one of the first German units to cross the border, with their attack beginning at 4:45 a.m. Their role was simple enough, seizing key infrastructure to form a path for the main German attacking force, which was to follow it across the border at 8 a.m. They did this easy enough, finding the few Polish infantry units and anti-tank cannons that came to stop them of little concern. They then bolted on to the main German offensive and remained active in Poland until it capitulated on the 6th of October. Then it was into France, where the LAH would next face combat in 1940. There, they were initially held in reserve, only being committed to the fight late in the campaign against the assortment of British, French, Dutch, and Belgian troops trapped in the Dunkirk pocket in late May. And even then they didn't do much, as Hitler's infamous halt order brought ground operations to a halt for a significant time and left the LAH to twiddle their thumbs. Next, they were sent to the Balkans, where they participated in the invasion of Yugoslavia and Greece, both in 1941. In this region, the LAH was instrumental in a grand campaign that brought the whole region under Axis control by the 1st of June 1941. But then it was on to the big one. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union that began in June 1941. They formed part of Army Group South, and thus were destined for Stalingrad, participating in several other notable battles along the way, such as the Battle of Kiev in August through September of 1941, and the Battle of Rostov in November through December of that same year. By this time, they had been expanded into a motorized infantry regiment, and using the rapid mobility of the trucks this new role gave to them, they were employed as mobile reserves, racing around the battlefield to plug the line whenever things started to look a bit dicey. Things didn't always go their way, however, and the Battle of Rostov proved to be one of the LAH's first major defeats. After this, the unit were put in reserve to recover and was reformed as a fully mechanized infantry division, which saw their trucks be supplemented by armored half-trucks such as the SD KFZ 251, a few assault guns, mostly Stug 3s, and the odd tank here and there. The LAH then remained in the Soviet Union for a couple of years, that being an ever more disastrous front that required everybody the right could throw at it. But then, following the collapse of Mussolini's government in July 1943, Italy was quickly becoming a crisis so great that even the indomitable might of the Red Army couldn't warrant it being ignored, and so the LAH was sent to Italy as part of a wider force to shore up defenses as Allied armies crept ever further up the peninsula. There, they mostly participated in anti-partisan operations and avoided most of the big battles. Come October, with the LAH being committed to lighter duties, the opportunity was taken to refit it as a proper armoured division, that being a unit type that was focused around tanks, with a secondary complement of mechanised infantry for good measure, rather than the other way around, as was the case when the LAH was a mechanised infantry division. By this time in the war, SS divisions were also at the front of the queue for getting the latest and greatest gear, and the LAH, being the first amongst them, both literally and figuratively, naturally got the best tanks the Nazi machine had to offer. Tigers, Panthers, the most modern Panzer IVs, the works. From there, the LAH's fortunes mirrored those of Germany itself, which is to say they were disastrous. As the calendar turned over into 1945, Germany was running out of both men and machines that it could give to the LAH, and so it spent the last few months of the war fighting insurmountable odds that saw the vast majority of its soldiers wiped out. They spent some time in Hungary and Austria, desperately trying to stop the Soviet advance, and then headed to Berlin to take part in the Reich's last stand. SS record-keeping had completely fallen apart by that time, so we're unsure of exactly how many of the LAH's men were still alive come their surrender on the 8th of May, but given the fact we know it had been reduced to a mere 1,600 come the fall of Vienna in April, it's fair to assume that those last few engagements were an absolute decimation. After all of this, the question remains, were they really the ultra-elite band of fanatical handy blokes that the Nazi propaganda machine made them out to be? A question to which the answer would appear to be an asterisk's no. We say asterisk because while we reject the idea that the LAH were elite per se, they certainly outperformed the average unit. But also, frankly, given the fact that it was filled with the most indoctrinated and highly trained troops who got top priority for best gear, it'd be a bit weird if they weren't above average. Consider as evidence the fact that the LAH, supposedly the best of the best, was not even the most highly decorated German unit, as if we look at the amount of Knight's Crosses awarded, that being a coveted gallantry award, we see that both the 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, and the 5th SS Panzer Division, Viking, were more awarded, which would also very much imply them to be the better units. Similarly, if we look at the total number of medals awarded, the LAH once again does not come out at the top either, that prize being taken by Das Reich. So certainly the LAH was good, but was it the best? We don't think so. So, would you believe it? It turns out that a unit carrying Adolf Hitler's name committed more than its fair share of atrocities. It's shocking, we know. So now let's take time to explore them, so we can gain an appreciation of just how grim the reality of the LAH was. The first incident of note occurred during the invasion of Poland in 1939, when First Lieutenant Hermann Müller-John, a member of the LAH, ordered the execution of 50 civilians, including several Jews, in Blony. His men, being the loyal fanatics they were, obeyed without question. This disgusted Lieutenant General Joachim Lemelson, commander of the 29th Infantry Division, who saw the whole thing, and so he reported it to his higher-ups. The incident eventually reached the desk of General Walter von Reichenau, commander of the 10th Army, who ordered Müller-John's arrest. However, following intervention by Heinrich Himmler at Hitler's behest, the SS were then moved to be under a separate party jurisdiction, leading to the abandonment of the investigation into these killings. As if that wasn't bad enough, on the very same day as the killings in Blony, another group of LAH soldiers under the command of Captain Christian Hansen killed 34 civilians as they swept through the village of Torzniec, and this was for seemingly no other reason than to satisfy their fanatical and wanton lust for blood. These too were investigated, but thanks to the SS's restructuring, nothing came of it. Those were then followed by another massacre in Zlotzu, only a few days later on the 3rd through the 4th of September, in which LAH soldiers, along with others from the Army's 17th Infantry Division, killed up to 200 civilians in a random and unprovoked act of mass violence. The motivations behind this particular massacre were never established, as investigations by both the Polish and West German government post-war failed to uncover a definitive reason. Also of note is the fact that Major General Herbert Loch, the 17th's commander, found this particular incident to be so barbaric that he penned a letter to the German military's high command in which he complained about the LAH's conduct in the field, noting not only this incident, but their general tendency to kill, maim, and burn every time they passed through a Polish settlement. Beyond Poland, the LAH was also responsible for the 1940 Wormhard massacre in France, where, after the surrender of the 2nd Battalion, Royal Warwickshire Regiment, they, along with stragglers from other British and French units, were taken to a barn near the titular village, at which point the LAH troops, under the command of Captain Wilhelm Monker, killed 81 of the prisoners in the barn by way of grenade, rifle, and machine gun. Our next incident of note comes from the Soviet Union in 1942. It occurred following the capture, torture, and murder of 6 LAH soldiers by Soviet troops in Tagarog in October of 1941. The mutilated bodies were discovered in March 1942, and in response, a decree was issued from Lieutenant General Seb Dietrich, the unit's then commander, that for the following 3 days, all captured Soviet prisoners were to be shot as revenge. As a result of this, 4,000 Soviet POWs met their end. Further down the line in 1943, the LAH would also play a significant role in the Fabrication, an anti-Jewish operation conducted in Berlin. It was aimed at rounding up Jewish workers employed in the arms industry, and the LAH, being both fanatically loyal and virulently anti-Semitic to its core, was only too happy to assist in the operation occurring in its own garrison city. When it got going, Jews from across Berlin were dragged out of their homes and workplaces, driven onto cattle wagons at bayonet point, where they were then transported to various concentration camps to meet their final fate. And of course, it goes without saying that any of them that quibbled, delayed, or protested were dragged out from the crowd, savagely beaten, and shot. Then, later in 1943, the LAH would make another bloody mark while it was stationed in Italy. This particular incident occurred shortly after the collapse of Mussolini's government in July, who up until then had had a comparatively better time of it under Mussolini than Germany's Jews had had under Hitler, were fleeing into hiding en masse, as with German forces annexing the country, they knew exactly what was going to come next. The LAH found 49 of these Jewish refugees near Lake Maggiore and proceeded to kill all of them in the most brutal way imaginable, binding them and throwing them in the lake to drown. And now we must look back to France, as when the LAH returned there to resist the Allied landings, they committed yet more atrocities, the most egregious of which occurred on December the 17th during the Battle of the Bulge. In this particular massacre, a unit of the LAH, led by Colonel Joachim Piper, encountered an Allied convoy, and after defeating it, proceeded to massacre hundreds of US prisoners from multiple units, with the total number killed never having been accurately deduced. They would then go on to commit a further massacre on that very same day, when LAH troops captured 11 African-American troops from the 333rd Artillery Battalion near the village of Wereth. And because of their race, one that fanatical Nazis such as the LAH held particular disdain for, they were not just tortured and killed, but mutilated also, with the massacring LAH troops cutting various body parts away from their remains as both a final further humiliation and to keep as macabre keepsakes. Ultimately, all of these atrocities are just the tip of the iceberg, cliff notes, to give you a general impression, as it were, because tragically, the LAH committed so many atrocities in its time that we could present them as a simple list containing nothing but bullet points of dates, locations, and the number of deaths, and would still not come close to being able to cover them all within the constraints of this video. They really were just that abhorrent. And so our dive into the history of the LAH comes to a close. What we've tried to do here is give you an introductory insight into the unit, the key themes, events, and ideas that you need to be familiar with to have a foundational understanding for your wider historical knowledge, or to use as a springboard for further reading should the unit have particularly tickled your fancy. Should you happen to fall into the latter camp, we have a few reading recommendations for you. Luckily, the LAH has got a lot of attention over the years, so you're spoiled for choice, really. In particular, we recommend Für Volk and Führer, which is an expansive memoir penned by LAH veteran Erwin Bartmann and Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, LSSAH at War 1935 to 1945 by Ian Baxter. We like this one in particular for the expansive amount of original photos Baxter has included, which add a layer of depth that you simply don't get with pure print. Finally, we also recommend Hitler's Guard by James Weingartner. This one's a bit of a nightmare to find nowadays, but offers an unmatched account of the many, many atrocities that the LAH committed. And thank you for watching. Just before you go, massive thank you to Enlisted for sponsoring today's video. You can play Enlisted for free on PC, PlayStation, or Xbox using the link below. New PC players, don't miss out on the special bonus pack, weapons, gear, 4,000 silver, and 3 days of premium account time. Dive into the action now, and thanks for watching.